And here he is at last, someone was saying. The man to end it all. The doctor tried to move, tried to open his eyes, but nothing happened. He didn't recognize the voice. But whoever it was, she had to be talking about him. It was always about him when people talk that way. My sisters, the doctor has returned to Khan. Yep, there you go. He was right. Him. He wondered if he should pop one eye open and make a joke. People love that. Or even sit bolt upright with a big smile. But when he tried, still nothing happened. No. Wait, what did she say? Khan? That rang a bell. He decided he should probably make a note. But then he remembered he didn't have a notebook, or a pen, or in fact the ability to move any part of his body. He decided to make a mental note instead, but promptly forgot what he was thinking about. Damn, why hadn't he made a note? The voice again. This has been foretold. We have always known in our bones one day he would return here. Ah, this was sounding very him. A long-awaited return, probably a prophesied battle against an ancient foe, rising from some terrible depths, he shouldn't wonder. All in a day's work for the doctor. He decided to leap to his feet, swish his coat about a bit, and choose someone to make him tea. But the world stayed dark, and the rocks stayed cold against his back. Perhaps Cass could help him. He'd just saved her life, hadn't he? She'd probably be with him in a moment. One good turn deserved another. Now a hand was stroking his face. It was a very warm hand, or was it that his face was very cold? Oh, that was interesting. He couldn't remember why he was cold. The voice, close now, warm breath on his face. Such a pity he's dead. Oh, dead, was he? That was going to make things a bit more Being dead, the doctor was unaware of his final journey across that barren world, and only the crows of Khan saw him borne into the cave where he and I would stand face to face at the very end. Ow! Someone had slapped him. There was a bitter aftertaste on his lips. He was somewhere else. Sitting on a stone floor. The wind had gone. So, maybe he was inside a cave, going by that dripping sound. There was movement around him. The smell of smoke and the crackle of burning torches. Now he heard a low murmur of female voices. Was one of them Cass? Of course. Cass must have dragged him to safety after he'd rescued them both from that crashing ship. If only he could remember exactly how he'd done that. He decided to open his eyes as soon as he remembered how. Cass! Someone shouted. Good. Obviously she was here somewhere and safe. Cass! Cass! It was a man's voice, high with desperation, and so cracked and full of terror that it took him several seconds to recognize it was his own. The shock opened his eyes. She was old and robed in scarlet. Her face was creased and withered, but her stare glittered as she squatted in front of him like a wise old ape. In a line behind her, against the firelit rock, stood several more scarlet-robed women, younger, but as pale and hollow-eyed as upright cadavers. Each held a steaming goblet. If you're referring to your companion, the old woman was saying, we are still trying to recover her body from the wreckage. You were thrown clear. Oh, the wreckage. Cass was still in there. He remembered Cass's face and how she'd looked at him when she'd realised what he was. She wasn't my companion, he said. She's almost certainly dead. No one could survive that crash. I did. No. That awful word, so calmly delivered. He fought to let nothing show on his face. We restored you to life, the old woman continued, but it is a temporary measure. You have a little under 4 minutes. It had always been a rule of the doctor's never to panic early. If he still had 4 minutes to fill, it was time to start owning the room. 4 minutes? He protested. But that's ages. What if I get bored? I need a television, a couple of books. Anyone for chess? Bring me knitting. You have so little breath left. Spend it wisely. Watch me, he thought. Quick scan. 6 women in the room, including the old one. 2 exits. One was obviously the cave mouth. The other led deeper into the mountains. Wait, how did he know it was a mountain? Had he been here before? He'd heard her name earlier. She'd named this planet. And what about this cave? Did look familiar. Okay, time to parade his local knowledge. If he could just remember any of it. Hang on. Is it you? It is, isn't it? It's you. Of course, he'd got it now. Am I back on Khan? He said triumphantly. You're the Sisterhood of Khan, keepers of the flame of utter boredom. The old woman's eyes flashed. Eternal life, she snapped. That's the one. Going by the look on her face, he'd already landed a hit. Good. Time to give it a bit more swagger. He'd clambered to his feet, but as he started to move, he could feel his body shutting down, and the pain of it almost knocked him flat. Buck up, Doctor, he thought. It won't hurt for long. Mock us if you will, said the old woman. Our elixir can trigger your regeneration, bring you back. Oh, interesting. They were trying to help him? There had been stories back on Gallifrey that the Khan Sisterhood could assist a regeneration in a mortally wounded Time Lord. But why should they care about him? And anyway, did he want to go through it all again? To be torn down and rebuilt into somebody else? Just to see more of the universe burn? He remembered his old tutor, lecturing at the academy, telling them all about the change they dreaded so much. You will walk into a storm, Barusa had said, and a stranger will walk back out. And that stranger will be you. A stranger to himself yet again. Why? What was the point anymore? The old woman was gesturing to the goblets, held by the others. Time Lord sciences elevated here. On Khan, the change doesn't have to be random. She moved among the sisters, pointing to one goblet, and then another. Fat or thin, young or old. He almost laughed. He was standing in the sales room of his possible futures. Man or woman? She asked him pointedly. Ginger? He wondered, but kept that thought to himself. Ohila was looking at him, expectant now. He'd wondered how briefly he knew her name and realised how he'd translated the tiny inscription on her left earring. Good to know some of his skill set was still online. Why would you do this for me? You have helped us in the past. Had he? A memory surfaced of being tied to a stake in the centre of this chamber while wood was stacked around him and torches were lit. One good burn deserves another, he decided not to say, then realised he already had. The Sisterhood of Khan were never big on gratitude. The war between the Daleks and the Time Lords threatens all reality. You are the only hope left. Oh, of course. They were afraid. But why did everyone always expect him to be a soldier? This is not my war, he said. I will have no part of it. You can't ignore it forever. Ignore it? He thought. No one in the universe could exactly ignore a war that was taking place at every moment in history at once. I help where I can. I will not fight. Because you are above such squalid practicalities as the business of warfare. Yes, he thought. Yes, he said. Because you are the good man, as you call yourself. I call myself the Doctor. It's the same thing in your mind. I'd like to think so. There was movement behind him, and her eyes flicked to a point over his shoulder. A new look came over her face. Was that cunning, he wondered, or just cruelty? In that case, Doctor, she said, attend your patient. 2 more of the sisterhood had entered the cave, and between them they carried what looked like a sack. But then they laid her on the altar stone in the centre of the room, and for a moment he could find no words. She looked so small. Around her chest he noticed a bandolier. It was clearly too old to have been hers originally, and he wondered briefly who had given it to her. Someone she cared about, or had cared about her. The thought stung him. He used the screwdriver to scan her for life signs, but he already knew it was pointless. You're wasting your time, Ohila was saying. She is beyond even our help. I know! He wanted to scream in her face. Instead, he just said she wanted to see the universe, because it was true, and it made him ache. She didn't miss much. It's very nearly over. I could have saved her. I could have got her off that ship. She wouldn't listen. Then she was wiser than you. She understood there was no escaping the time war. You are part of this, Doctor, whether you like it or not. I would rather die, he said, and meant it with both his hearts. Not a soldier, he thought. That was the promise. Never cruel, never cowardly, and never, ever a soldier. He knew what was inside him, the anger that could never be given voice. Death first. You're dead already, said Ohila. How many more will you let join you? He forced his eyes to Cass's face. No accusation there now. No hatred. No fear. Nothing. Just another broken child. Just another one. Doctor, if she could speak, what would she say? To me? Nothing. I'm a Time Lord, everything she despised. If she understood the man you are, and the power you could wield, she would beg your help, as we beg your help now. The universe stands on the brink. Will you let it fail? There was no scorn in her voice, no cruelty, no cunning, simple appeal. How many more, he wondered, how many more children crushed and burnt as he stood apart? He must never be a soldier. He knew that, but it was like a whisper in his ear now. How many more will die, Doctor, while you keep your soul pure and your hands clean? He felt himself gripping onto the stone table, trying to shut out that terrible, forbidden voice. What will it take, Doctor? The whisper continued. How many more will suffer and die before you act? It begged him. Ohila was moving amongst the goblets again. Strong or fast? She was asking. Wise or angry? What do you need now? Blood and rage thundered in the doctor's ears. To his own surprise, he noticed he was unclipping the bandolier from around Cass's still form. Was he doing that? It didn't feel like him. He was now holding the bandolier in front of his own eyes, as if for his inspection. It was cleaner than the rest of her clothes. It had been repaired many times. Obviously, it had been of great value to her, and she had worn it to the end. Someone, somewhere, would have been happy to know that. Warrior, he heard himself say. Ohila was staring at him. Warrior? I don't suppose anyone needs a doctor anymore. Make me a warrior now. It was his voice, but how could those be his words? It felt like someone else was talking through him. Ohila was passing him a goblet. I took the liberty of preparing this one myself. It was warm in his hands, and its smell was bitter one moment and sweet the next. Get out, he said. All of you! He heard the shuffle of feet. The sisters were moving deeper into the shadow. Will it hurt? He asked. Ohila's voice seemed to come to him from a great distance. Yes, yes, she said. Good, he replied, and raised the goblet. He was alone now, but in that last moment chose to remember all the times he hadn't been, all the friends who had kept him safe. Charlie, Kerez, Lucy, Tamsin, Molly, Frit, friends and companions I have known. I salute you. he looked to the broken child on the altar stone. And Cass, I apologise. The goblet was almost at his lips now. One last farewell to the man he had been. Physician, heal thyself. The doctor drank the poison and walked into the storm. The stranger awoke. His hands looked different. He pulled himself to his feet. Every nerve and sinew jangled. Wrong, wrong, everything all wrong. No, not wrong, he reminded himself. Just new, just new. He remembered to breathe, and even that felt strange. He was trying to focus on the chamber around him. Oh, the colour balance was wildly different again. The reds were a bit greener and the yellows were out of control. He knew he'd get used to it, but it always took a while. Sometimes he missed the monochrome world of his first two incarnations. It felt like a simpler, cleaner time. So many centuries had passed before he realised he'd just been colourblind. He looked around, testing his focal length, and saw a beautiful woman looking at him. "Is it done?" asked O'Healer. "Is it?" he wondered. "Is what done?" And then he saw Cass, dead on the stone, and the sight of her hurt him all over again. Good, he still had a conscience, but something new flexed under that familiar pain, like the flick of a serpent's eye in the darkness. What was that new feeling? Rage? Vengeance? Was that something to worry about? He ran a hand over his face. Wrong. 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 No. Not wrong. New. A new face for a new man. There were no mirrors in the cave, but hanging on the smoother rock walls was a highly burnished section of armour plate. Some ancient relic of battle, it would do. The first thing he noticed was that he was now wearing Cass's bandolier around his own chest. When had he put that on? He glanced up and met his own eyes. There is a moment, after regeneration, when the guttering soul of the old man looks out through the eyes of the new. So it was the doctor who looked into the mirror, but it was me who looked back. And there we stood, the doctor and I, one man, face to face. An end and a beginning. My height hadn't changed much, I noticed. My hair was a little shorter, though still dark. Those urgent blue eyes gone, and in their place a stare like winter. For a moment, that stare troubled me. But this was a time of war, and I had been reborn for battle. I was ready to look on a darker world. I turned my new face one way, and then the other. Was I younger? Older? There was something haggard and pained about me now, so it was difficult to tell. Standing before me was a man who had seen horror and no longer chose to hide it. Yes, I thought. This would do. This was right. I held my own gaze and spoke. The words came out in a cold whisper, a silken rasp, voice like a shiver out loud. "Doctor no more," I said.